There's a story told about a man who had not been inside a synagogue for a long time. And we're in our period of Elul, which in our congregation we often use these weeks on Shabbat to get us ready for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, so that it's not we're not jumping in the deep end so much. It's slowly walking into the water. And so it's the time of year where people come back to the synagogue when they haven't been in a long time. And in this case, this person hadn't been back to the synagogue in years, since he was a child. And he said to the rabbi, "So Rabbi, when I come back to the synagogue, what do I have to say in order to be accepted again?" And in particular, he said, "What does God need of me?" The rabbi replied, he said, "Come to the synagogue on Yom Kippur, say the Aleph Bet before God, and that should be sufficient." And then the rabbi added, "Maybe say I'm sorry also." But that was all it was. Just show up, say the alphabet, say I'm sorry, and you're done. All right. I ask that you not share this with all the people who show up only on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in 2 weeks. As we may have hundreds of people walk in, and then a few minutes later, hundreds of people walk out. But I think that the question is a common one. I think that my sense is, as I talk to people, my family, friends, congregants, I think a lot of us are asking, no matter how many times we've been to the synagogue in the last year or 10 years, so what exactly is enough? What does it mean these days to participate in Rosh Hashanah? What does it mean to come to Yom Kippur? Is it enough to come to the evening service but not the morning service? Is it enough to make a brisket but not light candles? Is it enough to come to the kids' service and hear the shofar but not hear the shofar blown in the midst of the whole congregation? Perhaps some of us say, maybe I'll come into the sanctuary 30 minutes late and conveniently leave right before the sermon. Definitely not enough, right? More seriously, we might say, is it enough to say the words about being repentant but not actually do anything about them? Is it enough to just recite the Aleph Bet and say I'm sorry? So what is it? What gets us across the finish line? It's not an easy question for us, in part because we set ourselves up as Jewish people, I think. We're not necessarily great. We're really good at setting rules and standards and order and putting a lot of pages in a book so that everybody feels guilty as soon as they sit down. They feel like they got to do the whole thing. And so the question becomes immediately, well, how much of this am I going to do? Rabbi Larry Hoffman is a premier, if not the premier, expert on Jewish prayer, modern liturgy. He tells a story, as the expert, he tells a story about the first time he had to lead High Holy Day services as a student in rabbinical school. He showed up at a congregation just like I did, and just like most of my colleagues have, and had an experience that I also had, that I imagine most of my colleagues have had. He showed up at the service as a first-year, second-year rabbinical student to a congregation that in its entirety probably wasn't many more people than are here tonight, and who had probably been in that congregation for decades, and he led a service where he was probably the least prepared to lead the service. And so he remembers, he says, "I took copious notes from my guide, from my textbook, on the holidays, and then, after preparing for weeks, I forgot or botched one thing after the next. At one point, on Yom Kippur afternoon, the congregation started chanting Jonah, 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 over and over again, like they were at a concert or something, asking for an encore. He didn't know what they were doing until he realized that he had gone straight past the entire reading of the book of Jonah, which is the core text of the afternoon service. He had skipped the whole thing, and the whole congregation was telling him, you got to go back and do the Jonah story, because that's why we're here. So after the service, the president of the congregation asked him how he felt about the service. And he talked about it as noting he could immediately note all the things he did wrong. He knew all of his mistakes as soon as they happened. And later on, he talks about the sense of trauma even that he would have from that he would always remember how he didn't do that service or how future services, he didn't do them well. And so he reflects on that and he says, it's not that I didn't do them well, it's that I didn't do them right. And there's a difference between doing something right and doing it well. And his point is, when we come to the High Holy Days, we shouldn't worry so much about doing it right, but we should worry about how we do it well. And here's what he means by that. He says, rightness is a function of following the rules. It responds to the standards that someone outside of yourself has set. Somebody has said, this is how you do this. This is the right way. This is the right time. This is the right place. These are the right clothes, the right words. Somebody has decided for you what is right. He points out that this is what we like to do. We love to make things the right way and the wrong way. We have book on top of book, instruction after instruction of how to do our prayers right. Even in our prayer books often now, we have in the footnotes the way for you to do that prayer correctly. Whether you should, down to the way that you bend your knee, even down to the way that you say the Shema, how loud you should be, that you should say the first line with a heavy voice and you should whisper the second line. We love these details, but his charge to rabbis and cantors at the holidays is as follows. He says, we should elevate praying well over praying right. To do this, the focus should be on how the worship affects the worshiper, as opposed to how the worshiper abides by the rules of worship. He's not saying that the bare minimum is saying the Aleph Bet. He says that the least rabbis and cantors can do is deliver a liturgy, a set of prayers that makes a difference in the people's lives without demanding that they first become experts in order to feel the difference. And then he provides a series of questions for prayer leaders to ask ourselves in preparing for services for the holidays. Cantor Kathy and I use these questions and others every year. As soon as the holidays are over, we always have a meeting and we go through what we think worked and what we think didn't, and we talk to people and we ask what struck them and what didn't, and we take copious notes. I never take copious notes otherwise, but that time of year I take notes. And we always review them over the summer, in June, early July, and we try to figure out how to change the coming year's holidays. But these questions shouldn't just be for us. And so I looked through the questions that we ask and the ones that Hoffman proposes, and I've adapted them for tonight. For if I were in your shoes and if I were going to sit in your seats in the coming weeks, what is it I should be asking myself? But first, before I share those questions, I want to share one piece that I think is a good example of what the goal of the holidays is. It's by Rabbi Larry Englander. He writes about 3 concentric circles as the goals. The first is the inner circle, the circle of the self, where we ask ourselves, what do I need what do I need to think about in order for my behavior to come to terms with my behavior of the last year, to think about my relationships and how I can improve them. So that's circle 1. The middle circle is the Jewish community, he says. Do I feel the power of the Jewish community in this moment? In other words, we can't, by his standards, do Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur alone. That part of those holidays is being immersed in our people and feeling the power of being not only in large numbers, but also acknowledging the people who are called up to the Torah for honors, who are celebrating maybe big anniversaries, or who have done some great service to our community and therefore being given an honor before the congregation, as well as to notice those people who perhaps are in need of our prayers, who are sitting next to us and who are sick, or those who are struggling with the loss that they faced in this last year. It's to be in the midst of the congregation, the community, and to notice the people around us, what they've done well, and what suffering they're facing. Final circle is the outer circle. He refers to this as God. I think that's too limiting. So I say the third circle is whatever is bigger than ourselves. That can include God, but it can also include the greater world. That at some point during Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we should be able to say, I did this well because I found that I have a broader connection to something well beyond me and well beyond this circle of my community. All right, so now finally in closing, what are the questions? If we're thinking of those 3 circles as the goals, ask ourselves, how much time will I need in the sanctuary to address these 3 circles? How might I spend time outside the sanctuary? At Tashlich, our service by the side of a river, perhaps apple picking as our religious school students are doing, brisket making for some of us, phone calling for others. What is it that I need to do on Rosh Hashanah afternoon or in the 10 days in between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur to make sure I use my time well? Second question, what do I need to hear? At the end of Yom Kippur, for those of you who earn your award of staying all the way through the day, which I always encourage everybody to do because I always like to promote that the end of Yom Kippur is as good or better than the beginning of Yom Kippur. Those who've been there know that there's a series of words that we repeat one after the next. And the middle ones are Baruch Shem Kavod. We say it 3 times. We're told that we say it because it reflects the holiness of the past, the holiness of the present, and the holiness of the future. This past week we had our class getting ready for the holidays and we talked a lot about the music, and the very first thing people said when we asked them just a basic question, what is it about High Holy Day music that's meaningful to you? A number of people use the same word. They said, High Holiday music transports me to somewhere else. It takes me back to my childhood, sitting next to my parents. It takes me to my future. It takes me to a place where just by hearing the sounds of the holidays, I feel that I'm sitting somewhere more than just in the seat that I'm in. People would say the same thing about the shofar. That the sound of the shofar shakes us and perhaps makes us aware of the present. Perhaps the sounds of children running around the hallways in the midst of all of us, all dressed up for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, perhaps that helps us to think about our future. So can we think about those 3 times? Can we hear them in some way while we're there? And finally, last question. Hoffman says, to do the holidays well, we have to be radically relevant. It's hard, this one. Because to be radically relevant, he says, you can't focus on the changes that are happening to the liturgy or the tunes or the way people look. You know, this person looks younger this year, this person looks older this year, how do I look? How is this different? How I remember this from years past? To be radically relevant means that we're focusing on what's changed more internally and externally in our world. Are we able to focus not on, oh, I don't like this tune, or services were too short or too long, or the rabbi's sermon was better last year? It's to say, I took the time to notice the changes in me, or the changes that are in our society, the changes in my family, to focus on what's different in us, in our community, in our world. Why, he says, because tunes and words to prayers and people's clothes, they always go back and forth. One day it'll change one direction, the next day it'll be back. Bell bottoms are back in. These things come back. So you missed your tune this year, it'll be back next year, the year after. But people change differently. So we have to work on being radically relevant to what's happening right now. That's, if we miss that opportunity, he says we'll have done the high holidays right, but not well. So with that in mind, I want to close with this reading. If I can find it. I ran outside to get it, and now I can't find it. What did I do with it? I can lose anything very quickly. There it is. So this is a reading that's put at the end of it's at the very end. It's on page 659. It's not in your prayer books. But just to tell you how far in the back of the book it is, it's page 659 in our Yom Kippur prayer book. It's right before we finish the service. And this is one of those prayers like I mentioned before. It's been added so that we have something that complements all the ways that we've hit our chest and said, I didn't do that well this year. that at the end of Yom Kippur, I don't know if this was written to talk about how we act in the world. I'd like to believe it's how we will feel if we do services well, to use Hoffman's term. I hope that when we read this at the end of Yom Kippur, that we'll feel that in our worship, in our observance of the holidays, that we've achieved hopefully all of these, maybe some of them. It goes as follows. We have aspired to reach higher. We have befriended those in need. We've created works of beauty. We've delighted in holy books. We've embraced our dear ones and held them close. We have fought for justice. We have given of ourselves. We have honored our mitzvot. We've immersed ourselves in prayer. We have joined hands to build community. Follows the alphabet. We have kept our word with integrity. We've loved faithfully and well. We've moved toward the light. We've nourished and supported. We have opened ourselves to hope. We've pursued the good. We've quieted our anger. We've remembered those who came before. We have sought meaning in Torah. We have trusted and been trustworthy. We've uttered words of beauty. We have vigorously struggled to do right. We have wept over our shortcomings. We have exchanged, they cheated on that one a little bit. We've exchanged blame for compassion. We have yearned to make life better. We have zestfully rejoiced. So my prayer for us is that in the coming weeks, in the month ahead, the month with so many of our holidays, that we do say the alphabet, but that it holds a great deal of meaning for us, that we do these services well, even if we don't do them right, that we spend the time we need, hear the words we want to hear, and that they're radically relevant for all of us. Shabbat Shalom.